Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? So hello, everyone. Welcome to Ask the Grantwriting Experts. I'm Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of your library of NIH grantsmanship courses. I have over 35 years of experience at NIH as an applicant, an intramural researcher, a staff writer, and now as a full-time NIH grant mentor. I've helped clients land over $500 million in federal funding, and I'm here to answer your NIH grant writing questions. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. So if you're attending live, just a reminder that you're in listen-only mode, so you can begin to start typing questions into the Q&A box right now. And you'll see that there are already some comments in the chat box, but feel free to start loading up questions into the Q&A box. If you're watching this as a recording, just a disclaimer that today's date is July 24th, 2024, and the information here is true to the best of our knowledge as of today, but you should always double check all information with your program officer. And none of the information that we talk about in this session is meant to replace the advising of a program officer. I just want to put that out there as well. So what you should be viewing in the library right now, given that it's late July, everybody, of course, on this call has access to at least one, if not more, of the courses in our library. I would imagine that for those who are applying for the fall deadlines, you're probably watching Master the R series. Hopefully you've worked your way through chapters 1 and 2, the prep steps and writing the specific aims, and are working on finalizing your decisions that you should have in place before you dig deep into the writing. So that would be your choice of institute, your choice of study section. You should have had a conversation with the program officer to vet the project idea and make sure it is of interest to them. You should have selected your study section and examined the roster very carefully and are thinking about how to pitch the project specifically to that audience. You should have a good sense of whether or not it is a clinical trial, a human subjects non-clinical trial, or a non-clinical trial project, so that you know how to write the project. And you're kind of finalizing all of these decisions as you prep to dig deep into the writing of the research strategy. So in my ideal world, that's what I would wish for you, that's where you are with all of this information. In terms of any NIH updates, NIH tends to be a little quiet over the summer, if you hadn't noticed. So probably the busiest time for NIH to release new information tends to be at the beginning of the calendar year. But having said that, this is kind of the calm before the storm, because of course we're gearing up for a new form set, which will be used for applications with deadlines on or after January 25th. And that new form set is going to have a lot of changes, not least of which is a change to the scoring criteria. And we are kind of gearing up to do mini tutorials on that here. And I'll be giving you my thoughts about, I've already got a lot of thoughts about how to, what this means in terms of people's grant writing, the pros and cons, how you should be approaching it. But there are other things as well. There are probably going to be some changes to the bio sketches. They've already released changes to the tables for the T32s. So there are going to be a lot of changes coming up. So this is kind of the calm before the storm. So enjoy it while you can. So we'll be covering, after we get past October 5th, we're going to be covering the changes in the new form set pretty extensively at AGE and elsewhere. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to welcome back my dear friend, Becky Miro. Dr. Becky Miro is here to talk to us today about the use of AI in grant writing. So she has some new information. Particularly, I'm very curious to hear the information about images, using AI for images. So Becky, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and then tell us about your topic.
Hey, Meg, thanks for having me back. So I think it was a few months ago that Dr. Matik was on AGE. I hope I got her last name right.
Madik.
And she,
yeah,
I'm sorry?
Her name is Madik, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And so she did a session on AI in grant writing. And so that got me curious. And I decided to like look around and see if there were any publications about this. Because I figured with this being such like sort of a hot topic right now, people had to be writing about it. So anyway, before I get into that, briefly about me, I have 25 years of experience in research administration, mostly in higher ed and nonprofits. I've been a certified research administrator since 2004. And I have my PhD in higher ed administration with a research methods concentration. And all of the information that I'll be talking about today will also be found in a blog post, which is in the chat. So with that said, let me share my presentation. Okay, perfect. Okay, so as you can imagine, with all of the talk about AI everywhere these days, it's a topic that's still developing. And so like I mentioned earlier, I decided to just look around and see if there were any publications about AI, but specifically in grant writing. I did find quite a few articles about AI in scientific writing, which isn't too different, but I kept my focus on the grant writing. And so I did find a handful of articles, and that what I'm presenting here today is just some of those takeaways from what I read. So clearly some of the benefits of grant writing is like they can help you generate ideas. So if you like, the blank page syndrome, right? They can be a helpful tool for someone who is a non-native English speaker. And like Meg mentioned, I didn't know that AI can also help with image generation. And the specific AI tools that can help with that are in the blog post. I spelled them out there. So there were many tips in the few articles I found, and one of them was don't start with a blank slate, as tempting as that may be. Have an initial draft of your application ready before going to AI. And the reason for that, the rationale was that the idea is then yours, but so is the idea, the draft, and the data are yours. Then you use the AI to refine the content. And you have to be very purposeful with your prompts because AI gives only as good as you put in. And so one of the things I read was that somebody who's more of a novice researcher may not get more out of AI because a more experienced researcher may be able to ask more refined questions or better questions. And so what that got me thinking about was that while AI is a good tool, for somebody who's starting out, it's still such a good idea to let a colleague or a mentor read your work, because not only do you get the feedback, but you start building collaborations as well. And actually, one of the publications I read, they were trying to generate content for specific aims for an R01, like they purposefully did this. It turns out it was pretty successful, but it was only as good as the commands it was given. So like if someone is unfamiliar with the grant writing process, they may not ask AI the right questions to get proper content for a successful application or for good return information. Another thing is once you get anything back from AI, always check the sources. So for example, are there seminal works in your field that should be included? And were they included? And there's also you might have a possible reviewer whose work you should have cited, for your benefit, and is it in there? And so that's where you always have to go back and do the human eye check. The other stuff is always thoroughly check anything that's AI generated, not just the words, but the images too. There have been instances of erroneous information and even plagiarized information because of AI. And lastly, if you're going to, test the water, so to speak, test it when the stakes are low and not when you're trying to work toward a deadline. That way, if something doesn't go right, you're not, jeopardizing making that deadline. Specifically regarding the sponsors, know your sponsors' policies about the use of AI. Some sponsors are wanting applicants to at least disclose if they used AI. There's a range of acceptability among sponsors. So just be sure you read guidelines and policy documents and are sure that you know what the policy is. And right now, NIH's only policy that I found is that it disallows the use of AI in peer review. So they don't want reviewers taking someone's content and putting it into AI. One of the reasons is because some AI tools, that information stays in there, and then someone else can go search the same AI tool and it might pull that information. I did read that ChatGPT has a way for people to delete what they put in. So it protects it somewhat, but also be aware of that it can live there. And so, I mean, I'm sure this will be a growing, topic as things continue to evolve. And I imagine most sponsors will eventually have policies. But that's sort of where it's at right now. You can use it to your advantage as always, and it's not a terrible thing, but just be aware of the potential pitfalls.
And just a reminder that Becky has written a blog post where she cites the articles. There were a couple of articles that she that are very, very recent that she worked with to get this information. Um, I remain really concerned about privacy with all of this,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure that that's, where a lot of you are as well. And I hadn't even thought about the idea that a reviewer might be thinking about like loading text in there to do a review, which kind of like, oh my God, it just makes me put my head in my hands. Like the idea that it's kind of horrifying to me because, there's always a risk of a breach of privacy anytime a reviewer lays eyes on your application. But the idea that somebody would actually upload it to a system just makes me feel physically ill. So hopefully there are not reviewers doing that. Hopefully NIH is being really kind of clear about the risks of doing that, because like I don't even know what it means when somebody says, well, you have the option to delete the information after it's been uploaded. Like, what does that mean?
Right.
Like, once you've uploaded it, it's like, so I kind of, as I hear more and more and read more and more, I guess, my sense is that I keep coming back to things like background sections are probably not a bad place. There's probably some use for AI in writing like the lit review in both a manuscript and a grant application. Maybe methodology, if it's kind of a standardized methodology, it's probably not a bad place for it. But boy, oh boy, I would not put any data in that at all. I wouldn't put a names page in it. I wouldn't put any data, nothing. But anyway, that's my own fears and
Yeah.
insecurities on behalf of applicants. I'm really curious to know more about the image generation, because I know that a lot of clients, I mean, a handful of people with whom I work have ready access to graphic artists who work at their universities or
Mhm.
academic medical centers and help them generate images, particularly on higher stakes applications. So when I work on center grant applications, it's not uncommon for me to have access to a graphic artist, and in my rudimentary, way, I'll hand sketch something out and like take a picture of it and send it to the graphic artist and say, this is the image I want for this. But like, but lots of people don't have
Yeah.
access to that, especially at the
Yeah.
K&R level. There isn't much of
Yeah.
an investment in it. So how does that
I,
work?
I didn't know that existed. I came across this in reading, and so I haven't had a chance, but I do plan to go out to the tools that I mentioned in the blog post and just see what it is you have to give it and see what it gives you back.
Yeah. Yeah. Really curious. Hmm. Yeah, I'm kind of wondering if there's I can picture something super simple like you have in any program, right? Where you can say here are the data in a spreadsheet, and like even just in like PowerPoint, you have all kinds of options for graphical depictions. But I'm kind of wondering if you want something more detailed and elegant, how do you even feed that information in?
Mhm.
So that's something that I'm really curious about that, because I really think there's a place for that, particularly for people writing at the K&R level, where there usually isn't a lot of institutional support for graphics for a lot of people. So that's probably something to look into. And again, the references are in the blog post, and you can get the link to the blog post in the chat. So if anybody has any experiences using, if they're willing to, this in the Q&A, none of the other attendees can see your name. So if anybody has experiences using AI in their grant applications, particularly for like image generation, figure generation, I'd be so curious to know about your experiences. And there's no, like obviously your name is not visible to other people. But in general, people can feel free to put questions in. I'm actually a little surprised that our attendance is still pretty high, even though it's late July. But I think the way that summer is expressing itself is that people are not asking a lot of questions. I think people are kind of like partially checked out during the summer. So anyway, I'll let you know that as we wait for people to add questions to the Q&A box, some of the upcoming topics for AGE. In 2 weeks, that would be August 7th, Dr. Madick is coming back, Aniela Itzo-Madick, who she's been on several times, but she's one of the other people who spoke about AI, and I think she spoke about its applications in manuscript writing. She's coming back to talk about how to respond to reviews and revise. And she'll be talking about how strategies for that in manuscript writing. I'll be talking about it in grant writing. And then on August 21st, it'll be me talking about where and how to write up preliminary data in an NIH R series application. And I have some new slides to share from Master the R series that I added in the last update. And then in September, we'll move into our Q&A for the upcoming deadlines. And then after the October 5th deadline, we'll be focusing pretty intensively on the changes to scoring criteria. So the other thing that I wanted to share, last week we were talking about how to write, or two weeks ago, we were talking about how to write team tables. And I could not find that sample that I wanted to give you for larger teams. So I did find it. So I'm going to share it with you while we wait for people to put questions in, if people have questions. Okay, so this is my silly made up team table for a larger project. So for the R and K series, there's the table that I have in Master the R series and Master the K series, which has, just the PI, the co-Is, if there's a consultant, and just really quick 1 or 2 line explanations. But what do you do if you're writing something much larger, like something that's a multi-project submission? So, this could be like a center grant application or a multi-project U. That's kind of a different, first of all, you usually have way more pages than just the usual but you also tend to have a much larger team and they tend to be at different places. So one thing that I like to do is to break out the places so that like this would be one location, this would be another location, this would be another location. Obviously, this is all made up. I can't show you any of my teams. This is just made up stuff. But you would have, and you wouldn't necessarily list every single solitary team member at every location. But what you might do is have the overall PI and some of the more prominent co-investigators. And then at each location, you would list the site PI and what they're going to do and any kind of more prominent person there. So that you have a sense, again, at a glance of how many organizations are involved. In a real world setting, it would be you'd list where it's located so that you'd know like, oh, all of these organizations are located in Ohio versus like, there's one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, one in the Northwest, one in the Southeast. That might make a difference in terms of how reviewers review your communication plan. So this is kind of the at a glance scorecard strategy that I would employ for a larger application. So each of the places, and then just the really high level people at each place, which would be the overall PI, the site PIs at each of the places, and then the more heavily involved team members at each of those places. So for whatever that's worth, there it is. This is actually a version of this is in Master the P and U series. If anybody doesn't have access to that course and would like a copy of this team table, just email me at meg@bouviergrant.com and I'll send you a PDF version of this table. Okay, let's see. You've consistently said that a first-time PI should request up to 40% effort on their first R01 as they don't have others. I have a senior co-investigator who is strongly challenging this. They feel I should only be at 20% and that if I want to be at 40%, I should lead all three aims. Other co-investigators and research staff are on at 25% for some aims. Is there a position 20% effort or lead on all aims at 40% reasonable? So I'm going to say, like, first, I'm going to say I don't know that I have consistently said that if you are the PI, you should be at 40% effort because percent effort has to do with budget and I don't touch budgets. I have nothing to do with budgets. So these were kind of guesses. These are not gospel. I am definitely not the expert or the final word on anything having to do with budget or effort. I'm just kind of like guessing and kind of throwing out some numbers based on what others, what other like colleagues and clients have said to me. And I'm going to ask Becky's opinion in a sec. But I will say that if you're an early stage investigator, typically you are the sole PI leading all three aims. So having the higher percent effort would not an ESI and I'm an MPI, right? So if you're an MPI and you're not an ESI and you're not leading all three aims, obviously you're going to have a lower percent effort because some of the budget is going to have to go to the other PIs, So, but what, like there are no hard and fast rules about like it should be this percent of this scenario and that percent of that scenario. So Becky, do you want to weigh in? Do you ever do budgets?
I do budgets. I have seen both sides of this. I've seen where clearly if you're doing more of the work, you should realistically budget higher effort. I've even seen the sponsor call a faculty member out for not sufficient effort based on what they were seeing the project would involve.
Yeah.
So I would say if to just budget realistically based on what the PI will be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's kind of always the take home message, right? Is that it should be commensurate with realistically with the amount of work you're going to need to run the project. But, there's no hard and fast rule about like, if you're a sole PI leading all three aims, your percent effort is going to be higher. And if there are other PIs and they're leading other aims, then everybody's percent effort comes down because some of the budget has to go to the other leaders. But like, if you were, and this is a Becky question again. So if this was your first R01 and your only R01, and it was a multi-PI plan, what would be a range of percent efforts that you might see in a scenario like that? Maybe like 20 to 30 or something?
I would say 30%. I almost felt like given, and I don't know that study and I don't know the scope, but I saw the mention of three aims. 20 almost seemed a little bit low, but again, it depends.
Yeah, I know. I had the same response where, like 20 seems a little low for a PI, but we don't know what the other two aims are or, how much time and effort it would take for the other PIs to do those and what their percent effort is, what piece of the budget you're going to get. And here's another person saying, to the extent it is helpful, I've been told by multiple senior mentors that the PI should be 20 to 25%, co-I is at 5 to 10%. Again, like I could off the top of my head name 20 senior mentors who would disagree with that and 20 who would agree with it. So there is no hard and fast rule like that. It's really dependent on the budget, what realistically how much time everybody needs to do what they're doing, how much effort you have on other projects. Like there isn't a hard and fast rule like that. I've seen co-Is with pretty significant percent efforts, and I've seen PIs, sometimes there are three PIs, one for each aim. And so then the percent effort can go quite low. But of course, the PI effort should be higher than any co-I effort for sure, obviously. But I really kind of bristle when people say, oh, well, I've heard from many senior people these hard and fast rules. I'm kind of like, oh, why do they say things like that? Because that's for every 20 people you find who agree with that, you can find 20 senior people who serve as reviewers who don't agree with it. So I just kind of caution people that there aren't hard and fast rules, and work with your pre-award support office very early in the process to kind of nail down what everybody's budget and percent effort can be, because budget and percent effort is like one of those things on summary statements that comes up a lot. As Becky was saying, sometimes reviewers will complain that somebody has too high or too low a percent effort,
Yep.
that it's not commensurate with what they feel is needed for the project. There can be complaints that there's overlap in expertise, and so you're spending too much money. The budget is just in general too high for the project. Budget and percent effort are big targets for criticism, on which again speaks to the idea that there are no hard and fast rules. And different reviewers will expect different things, but work with your pre-award support office and ask your mentors. I'm just saying that, and weight their opinion if they're senior people and they're successful people. I'm just saying that nobody has the final word, and be very dubious when somebody says, oh, well, this is a general benchmark. Like, there aren't any. So just be cautious when you hear somebody say that. And so ask a lot of opinions and then kind of try to suss out what might be the best scenario for your set of circumstances. And then just see what the study section says. You never know until you actually submit what they're going to say. We have another question for early stage investigator R01s. Is there a budget per year that is recommended to stay under? I heard best lower than 500K per year. Is that correct? Since we will need a letter of approval for more than that. No way I can do 250, which is modular. Okay, so this is the question of modular versus standard budget versus I need special permission to exceed the 500K cap per year on the R01. I do have a strong opinion that whenever possible, as an ESI first time R01, if at all possible, try not to put yourself into a project where in a position where you're going to have to ask to exceed the 500K cap on your first R01. I don't see that happening very frequently. If you're in a situation like that, I would encourage you to try to narrow the scope of your aims and ask something that's smaller and more manageable for a first-time R01 applicant. All first-time R01 applicants suffer from a credibility issue. That's the bottom line. Nobody's ever giving you an R01, so you're an unknown quantity, right? So you have to convince reviewers that if they give you this big award over 3 to 5 years, several $1,000,000, whatever it's going to be, that you're actually going to steer the research enterprise appropriately and turn that investment into publications. So you can imagine that if you're already suffering from a credibility issue, then going to them and asking for even more money to exceed the cap is going to be a tough sell. That's going to be an uphill battle. I understand that sometimes it has to be done because of the nature of the project. And in that instance, it's always good to have somebody much more senior as a co-investigator on the project who knows the program officer, who can introduce you to the program officer and speak to your abilities, and be kind of like a character reference almost, to say that you're going to make good on that investment. But it's really hard to talk reviewers and program officers into letting you exceed the 500K cap on a first time R01. Whether or not you should do a modular budget versus a non-modular budget that's under the 500K cap, I have less of a firm idea about. And this is another thing where clients come to me all the time and say, my mentors are really senior and super experienced, and they say you absolutely should do X. and I've heard it both ways. You have to do a modular budget on your first R01. You absolutely shouldn't do a modular budget on your first R01. I don't have a strong opinion about that because I see them both get funded and I see them both not get funded. So like, I would try to do what makes the most sense for your project, and again, um, everybody is going to have an opinion. Your pre-award support people are going to have an opinion. Your mentors are going to have an opinion. They're just opinions. There are no hard and fast rules about this. So, and some of it is just trial and error, and how your study section is going to respond. So, if you can do a modular budget on the first R1, great. If you can't make that work in terms of the budget, that's okay. I see lots of people get funded on the first R1s without a modular budget. Would you agree with that, Becky? Is that
I do agree with that. And what I was thinking as you were talking is, if the budget will fall out on its own by being realistic. I think
right?
if you are trying to cut corners to get under the 250 and
Yeah,
you can't pull it off because it's not realistic, they'll see through that, or you'll struggle trying to get the study done.
right. Yeah,
So always budget realistically.
yeah. I think that is absolutely spot on advice that, you have to develop a realistic budget and you do need to work with your mentors for that when it's the first time around. Really sit down and try to work out a very realistic budget. And it's going to land where it lands, you know? And as I said, if it's something that is going to require you to exceed the 500K cap, that's a case where I would say try to narrow your aims, try to do something more focused. But modular or non-modular, it's going to go where it's going to go. Like the budget is what it is to do the project. And I in my experience, I can't say that, oh, applicants, ESI applicants, or even non-ESI applicants are always more successful if they do one versus the other. That hasn't been my experience. But it sounds like it hasn't been Becky's either. So, all right, and we are over time.
Yeah.
So I will thank you everybody for coming. I'm kind of actually a little shocked at how many people are coming, given that we're in the dead of summer. So it makes me hopeful that we'll see some of you again in August. So again, our next session, August 7th, Dr. Aniela Ito-Madic will be coming back to talk about, she and I will be talking about um, uh, responding to reviewer comments and revising and resubmitting manuscripts and grant applications and our thoughts about strategies to do that. And then on the 21st, I'll be talking about where and how to write a preliminary data for an R series application. So thank you, Becky, so much for coming. I encourage
Thanks
everybody
for
to
having me.
at her blog post, and there are a couple of articles that were just published that she cites, and that's it. I wish everybody a wonderful day, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.
Bye bye.